Marriage is a funny thing. It's supposed to be built on love, trust, and respect, but when those things start to crack, it's like standing on thin ice. You know, it's only a matter of time before you fall through. Looking back, I think the ice started cracking a long time ago in my marriage, but I was too blind, or maybe too stupid, to see it. My name's Jack. I'm 41, and until recently, I thought I had a good life. I've been married to Sarah for 10 years, and while things weren't perfect, I figured we were solid. We had a nice house, no kids by choice, and the kind of marriage that looked good from the outside. But on the inside, well, let's just say things have been off for a while. It started small. Sarah seemed distant, always on her phone or finding excuses to stay out late. She complained about random things, how I loaded the dishwasher, the way I left my shoes by the door, but I chalked it up to stress. She'd been under a lot of pressure at work, and I figured she just needed some space. What I didn't know was that she wasn't just looking for space. She was looking for a way out. The first real red flag came one night after dinner. Sarah had made this fancy pasta dish she saw on TikTok, cream sauce, mushrooms, the whole 9 yards. It was delicious, and I made sure to tell her so. "You've outdone yourself," I said, wiping my mouth with a napkin. "This is amazing." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I just thought I'd try something new," she said, brushing it off like it was nothing. An hour later, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My head was spinning, my stomach was in knots, and I had this weird, heavy feeling in my chest. I figured it was food poisoning. Maybe the cream sauce had gone bad, but Sarah seemed fine. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice dripping with concern. "Yeah," I muttered, clutching my stomach. "Probably just ate too much." But as I crawled into bed that night, a nagging thought crept into my mind. Why wasn't she sick too? Over the next few weeks, the same thing kept happening. Every time Sarah cooked dinner, I'd feel like crap afterward. Sometimes it was mild, just a headache or a bit of nausea. Other times, it was bad enough that I'd have to lie down for hours. "You should see a doctor," Sarah suggested one morning as I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of ginger tea. "Maybe there's something wrong with your stomach." "Maybe," I said, though I wasn't convinced. I'd never had stomach issues before, and the timing seemed weird, but I didn't want to argue, so I made an appointment with my doctor. The test came back normal. No food allergies, no digestive problems, no mysterious illnesses. The doctor suggested stress might be the culprit, which made me laugh. "Stress?" I said. "My life's about as exciting as watching paint dry." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And then one night, things took a turn I never saw coming. Sarah had been in a weird mood all day. Snappy, short-tempered, like she was itching for a fight. I tried to stay out of her way, but by the time dinner rolled around, the tension was unbearable. "What's your problem?" I finally asked, setting my fork down. "My problem?" She snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Maybe my problem is that I'm married to a guy who doesn't even try anymore." I blinked, stunned. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," she said, crossing her arms. "When was the last time we, did anything?" Her words hit me like a slap in the face. It wasn't like I hadn't noticed the dry spell in our sex life, but I've been so preoccupied with feeling like garbage that I hadn't thought much about it. "Maybe it's because I've been sick all the time," I shot back, my voice rising. "Or did that not occur to you?" "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "You're not sick, Jack. You're just lazy." I stared at her, my anger boiling over. "You've got some nerve," I said, standing up. "I've been bending over backward trying to keep this marriage together. And you're calling me lazy? Maybe if you spent less time on your damn phone and more time being a partner, we wouldn't be having this conversation." She didn't respond. She just sat there, her jaw clenched as I stormed out of the room. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind raced. Was she right? Had I been neglecting her? Or was there something else going on? Something I wasn't seeing? I didn't know it then, but that argument was the beginning of the end. The next day, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time. I started paying attention. I watched Sarah more closely, how she acted, what she said, the way she moved around the house. And the more I watched, the more I noticed things I'd been ignoring for months. Like how she was always the one insisting on cooking dinner, even though she used to hate it. Or how she'd suddenly become obsessed with health supplements, claiming they were for her skin, but never actually taking them herself. And then there was the way she'd look at me sometimes, like she was waiting for something. The final straw came a week later. Sarah had made another elaborate dinner, some kind of chicken dish with a side of rice. And I was about halfway through my plate when I noticed something strange. The chicken tasted off. Not bad, exactly, but kind of metallic, like it had been sitting in a tin can for too long. "What's in this?" I asked, holding up a forkful of chicken. Just some spices, she said casually, not meeting my eyes. Something about the way she said it made my stomach turn. Is it new? I pressed. I don't think I've tasted this before. She shrugged. Maybe. Why? Does it taste weird? I stared at her, my gut telling me something was very, very wrong. No, I lied, setting the fork down. That night I didn't get sick, but I didn't eat anything else either. The next morning I made a decision. I needed answers. Sarah was at work, so I searched the kitchen, going through the spice rack, the pantry, the fridge, anywhere she might have hidden something. And that's when I found it. A small, unlabeled bottle tucked behind the coffee canister. I unscrewed the cap and sniffed it, but there was no smell. Just a faint, chalky residue around the rim. My heart started to race. What the hell was this? Finding that bottle wasn't just a red flag. It was a damn fire alarm going off in my brain. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was it medicine? A drug? Poison? What the hell was Sarah doing? I needed answers, but I couldn't just march up to her and start accusing her of whatever this was. If she was guilty of something, she'd deny it. If she wasn't, I'd look like a paranoid idiot. Either way, I needed proof before I made my move. So, I did what anyone would do in my position. I called my buddy Mike. Mike's one of those guys who always seems to know someone who knows someone. Need a mechanic? Mike's got a guy. Want tickets to a sold-out concert? Mike's your man. So when I told him I'd found something sketchy and needed it tested, he didn't even hesitate. Bring it over, he said. I'll see what I can do. I drove to his place that afternoon, the bottle wrapped in a plastic bag and hidden under the passenger seat. Mike lived in a small apartment cluttered with half-finished projects. A broken guitar on the coffee table, a drone missing 2 propellers on the counter. He took one look at the bottle and raised an eyebrow. Where'd you find this? He asked. In my kitchen, I said. Behind the coffee canister. Can you figure out what it is? He nodded, already pulling out a small testing kit he apparently just had lying around. Shouldn't take long. You want a beer while you wait? No thanks, I muttered, pacing the room. My nerves were shot, and the last thing I needed was alcohol clouding my judgment. About 20 minutes later, Mike called me over to the counter. Well, he said, holding up a test strip that had turned a faint shade of purple. This isn't sugar, that's for damn sure. What is it? I asked, my stomach in knots. He glanced at me, his expression serious. It's a sedative, low grade, but enough to mess with you if you take it regularly. Think of it like a mild tranquilizer. I stared at him, my mind racing. You're saying someone's been drugging me? Mike shrugged. I'm saying if you've been eating or drinking anything with this in it, it could explain why you've been feeling like crap. My blood ran cold. I thanked Mike, took the bottle, and drove home in a haze. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but I still couldn't wrap my head around it. Why would Sarah be drugging me? What was she trying to do? When I got home, I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house. From the outside, it looked so normal. Perfectly trimmed hedges, a cute little porch, the kind of place you'd see on a postcard. But inside, it felt like a battlefield. Finally, I went inside and put the bottle back exactly where I'd found it. If Sarah was doing something shady, I didn't want her to know I was onto her. Not yet. That night, I decided to test my theory. Sarah had cooked dinner again. Pasta, her go-to, and I made sure to eat just enough to keep her from getting suspicious. Feeling any better? She asked as I pushed my plate away. Yeah, I lied, forcing a smile. I think the worst of it's over. She nodded, her expression unreadable, and I couldn't help but wonder what was going through her mind. Hours later, after Sarah had gone to bed, I sat in the living room, scrolling through my phone and trying to figure out my next move. That's when I stumbled across something that made my blood boil. It was a message board thread about divorce tactics, specifically ways to manipulate your partner into looking like the bad guy. And right there, in black and white, was a post about drugging your spouse to make them seem unfit for the relationship. Use a mild sedative, one post read. It'll lower their libido and make them seem disinterested in intimacy. When you bring up the lack of connection, they'll have no defense. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. Was this what Sarah was doing? Was she trying to set me up so she could blame me for the problems in our marriage? It sounded insane. But then again, so did everything else that had been happening lately. The next morning, I decided to confront her, sort of. I didn't want to tip my hand completely, but I needed to see how she'd react if I pushed her buttons. Hey, I said over breakfast, keeping my tone casual. I've been thinking about what you said the other night. About how we've been distant. She looked up from her coffee, her expression wary. Yeah, I think you're right, I said. Maybe we should try to reconnect. You know, spend more time together. For a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Panic, maybe? But she covered it quickly, smiling tightly. That's a good idea. she said. I've been feeling the same way. Her words sounded sincere, but I wasn't buying it. That evening, I set up a hidden camera in the kitchen. It felt sneaky, underhanded, but I needed to know what she was doing when I wasn't around. If she really was drugging me, I needed proof. The camera was small, barely noticeable, and I positioned it so it had a clear view of the counter where Sarah usually prepped meals. Then I waited. The next few days were a blur of pretending everything was fine while secretly checking the camera footage every night. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just Sarah cooking, cleaning, going about her usual routine. But on the fourth night, I finally caught her. She was standing at the counter, her back to the camera, pouring something into a pot of soup. Then she reached behind the coffee canister, pulled out the small bottle, and added a few drops to the soup before stirring it. My heart sank. I watched the footage over and over, each replay hammering the truth deeper into my skull. Sarah wasn't just drugging me. She was doing it deliberately, methodically. And for what? To make me look bad? To justify leaving me? I didn't know the full story yet, but one thing was clear. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd shared my life with for the past decade, was not the person standing in that kitchen. Catching Sarah on camera changed everything. It was like someone had finally turned on the lights in a dark room, and all the shadows I'd been ignoring were suddenly right there, staring me in the face. There was no more doubt, no more second-guessing. My wife, the woman I'd built my life with, was deliberately poisoning me. And for what? To set me up as the bad guy? To make me look like the reason our marriage was falling apart? My anger burned hotter than ever, but I knew I couldn't let it get the best of me. If I wanted to confront her, I needed to do it on my terms, with all the facts laid out and every piece of evidence in my corner. She'd been playing dirty, but two could play that game. The next morning, I called Mike again. "Jesus, Jack," he said when I told him what I'd found. "This is some next-level crazy. What's your plan?" "First, I need to find out exactly what's in that bottle," I said. "I've got the video, but I want proof of what she's been giving me." Mike paused, then said, "I know a guy who works at a lab. He can run a test on it, no questions asked." "Perfect," I said. "I'll bring it over." That night, while Sarah was in the shower, I carefully removed the bottle from its hiding spot and slipped it into my pocket. My hands were shaking the whole time, partly from nerves, partly from rage, but I managed to stay calm. The next day, I dropped the bottle off with Mike, who promised to get it tested ASAP. "You're playing with fire, man," he said as I handed it over. "Yeah, well," I said with a bitter laugh, "I didn't ask to get burned." While I waited for the lab results, I kept up the act at home. I pretended to be clueless, going through the motions of everyday life while secretly gathering more evidence. I started recording our conversations, hoping she might slip up and say something incriminating. I also kept checking the hidden camera footage, and every night, it was the same story. Sarah sneaking drops of that mystery liquid into my food or drink, completely unaware that she was being watched. It was like living in a bad movie, except there was no director to yell cut and no script to follow. Just me, Sarah, and the slow, simmering realization that my marriage was a complete lie. The lab results came back a few days later. Mike handed me a sealed envelope, his expression grim. "I hope you're ready for this," he said. I tore it open right there in his kitchen, scanning the report. My stomach churned as I read the words, benzodiazepine derivative. Common effects include sedation, decreased libido, and fatigue. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. She wasn't just drugging me. She was trying to turn me into a shell of myself. "What are you going to do?" Mike asked. I folded the report and shoved it into my pocket. Expose her. That night, I set my plan in motion. I didn't touch the food Sarah made, claiming I wasn't hungry, and waited until she went to bed before reviewing the footage again. Sure enough, there she was, adding her special ingredient to my dinner. The next morning, I confronted her. "Sarah," I said as we sat at the breakfast table, "we need to talk." She looked up from her coffee, her expression wary. "About what?" I pulled out my phone and played the video. Her face went pale as she watched herself on the screen, the bottle in her hand, the drops falling into the pot of soup. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "You tell me," I said, my tone cold. "You've been drugging me, Sarah." "Why?" I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her eyes darting around like she was searching for an escape. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, slamming the phone onto the table. "I know what's in that bottle. I had it tested. You've been slipping me sedatives, trying to make me sick, trying to mess with my head. What the hell is wrong with you?" For a moment, she just sat there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, to my surprise, she laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. "You want to know what's wrong with me?" she said, her voice venomous. What's wrong with me is that I'm married to a man who doesn't give a damn about me. You've been coasting through this marriage for years, Jack. Years. And you have the nerve to act like you're the victim? Her words hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't back down. So your solution was to drug me? I shot back. To ruin my health? And then blame me for it? You think that makes you the hero in this story? I didn't have a choice, she said, her voice rising. You wouldn't listen to me, Jack. You never listened. I had to do something to make you see how broken this marriage is. I stared at her, my anger boiling over. You didn't want to fix this marriage, Sarah. You wanted an excuse to leave without looking like the bad guy. Well, congratulations, you got your excuse. But now everyone's going to know the truth. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean, I got everything I need, I said, my voice cold. The videos, the lab report, the texts. I'm done, Sarah. And when I file for divorce, you can bet your ass everyone's going to know exactly what you've been up to. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. You wouldn't, she whispered. Watch me, I said, standing up and grabbing my keys. As I walked out the door, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, relief, and a deep, gnawing sadness. This wasn't how I wanted my marriage to end, but at least now, I knew the truth. Leaving that house felt like walking away from a battlefield. My heart was pounding, my mind racing, and my hands were still trembling with anger. Sarah's words echoed in my head. I didn't have a choice. Bullsh asterisk T. She had a choice. Dozens of them. And every single one she made had been to lie, manipulate, and destroy what little trust we had left. I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about ending the marriage anymore. This was about clearing my name, protecting my sanity, and making damn sure she didn't get to play the victim in this mess. My first call was to Diane, the divorce lawyer Mike had recommended. She didn't waste time sugarcoating things. This is serious, she said after I told her everything. The drugging alone could have serious legal consequences for her. But more importantly, it gives you a rock-solid case for divorce. Good, I said, gripping the phone. I don't want her spinning this into some sob story where I'm the bad guy. We'll make sure that doesn't happen, Diane assured me. Do you have evidence of the drugging? Yeah, I said, pulling the lab report from my pocket. I've got the results, plus video footage of her slipping it into my food. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a low whistle. That's more than enough. Let's get started. Over the next few days, I worked with Diane to put everything together. The lab report, the hidden camera footage, even screenshots of texts and emails where Sarah had hinted at her unhappiness, but never once mentioned trying to fix things. It was grueling, reliving every moment, but it also felt strangely cathartic. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of my life instead of just reacting to whatever curveball Sarah threw my way. Meanwhile, Sarah was unraveling. At first, she tried to act like nothing had happened. She called and texted constantly, alternating between angry rants and tearful apologies. Sarah, you're blowing this way out of proportion. Sarah, we need to talk, Jack. Please don't do this. Sarah, I only did it because I love you. Can't you see that? I ignored every message. When that didn't work, she started showing up at the house, banging on the door, yelling for me to let her in. Jack, she screamed one night, her voice muffled through the locked door. You can't just walk away like this. I'm still your wife. I stood in the living room, staring at the door, my jaw clenched. Ethan and Lily weren't there to witness it. They were staying with their grandparents for a few days. But the noise still made me sick to my stomach. Eventually, she gave up and left, but the damage was done. The final straw came when I got a call from Greg, the manager at Sarah's workplace. Jack, he said, his voice hesitant. I don't want to get involved, but I thought you should know. Sarah's been talking about you at work. A lot. What's she saying? I asked, though I already had a pretty good idea. She's telling people you're the reason she's so unhappy. That you've been distant, neglectful. You know, painting herself as the victim. I felt my blood boil. Of course she is, I muttered. I just thought you should know, Greg said. For what it's worth, I don't believe her. You've always seemed like a decent guy. Thanks, Greg, I said, hanging up. That night, I made my decision. I wasn't just going to file for divorce. I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. I started with her family. They'd always liked me, but I knew Sarah would try to twist the narrative and turn them against me if I didn't get ahead of it. I called her sister, Emily, and told her everything. She did what? Emily gasped, her voice rising in disbelief. I have proof, I said. Videos, lab results, everything. I'm not making this up, Emily. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I believe you. Sarah's been different lately. I didn't want to say anything, but something's been off for a while. I'm so sorry, Jack. Next, I sent copies of the lab report and video footage to Diane, who wasted no time filing the divorce papers. Within days, Sarah was served, and her reaction was exactly what I expected: pure rage. She called me, screaming into the phone. "You're trying to ruin me," she yelled. "No, Sarah," I said coldly. "You ruined yourself." But it didn't stop there. Diane suggested we file a restraining order, given Sarah's erratic behavior, and I agreed. The last thing I needed was her showing up at the house again or trying to manipulate the kids. When the order was granted, it felt like a small victory, but I knew the fight wasn't over. The hardest part of it all was explaining everything to Ethan and Lily. They were still too young to understand the full story, but they could sense the tension, the way their mom's absence was slowly becoming permanent. "Why isn't Mom coming home?" Ethan asked one night as we sat on the couch. "She's not feeling well," I said carefully, "and we decided it's best if she stays somewhere else for a while." "Did you fight?" Lily chimed in, her big eyes staring up at me. I nodded, my heart breaking a little. "Yeah, we did. But no matter what happens, I love you both more than anything. That's never going to change." They nodded, and for now, that seemed to be enough. As the weeks went on, Sarah's life continued to spiral. The divorce was in full swing, and Diane was relentless, using every piece of evidence we had to make sure I came out on top. Her reputation took a hit too. Word spread about what she'd done, and people started distancing themselves from her. Friends stopped calling, co-workers avoided her, and even her own family began to question her version of events. I'd like to say I felt bad for her, but I didn't. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. One night, as I sat on the back porch, staring up at the stars, I felt a strange sense of relief. The anger, the sadness, the confusion, it was all still there, but it wasn't as heavy as it had been. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Divorces can be messy, but this one? This wasn't just messy. It was a full-blown disaster, and Sarah was stuck in the middle of the wreckage. Every lie she told, every move she made to twist the narrative, only seemed to backfire. She wanted to come out of this looking like the victim, but instead, she was becoming the villain of her own story. The legal process was brutal, but Diane had made sure I was ready for it. Every time Sarah tried to play the poor, abandoned wife card, we hit back with hard evidence. The footage of her drugging me, the lab results proving what was in that mystery bottle, even the text she'd sent me over the years that hinted at her manipulative tendencies. It all painted a very clear picture of who she really was. The court didn't take kindly to what she'd done, especially when Diane brought up the potential health risks of the drugs she'd been slipping me. Sarah tried to deny it, of course, but the evidence was airtight. She had no defense. Outside the courtroom, things weren't much better for her. Word of her actions had spread far and wide, and the fallout was swift. Her co-workers, many of whom had initially believed her sob story, started distancing themselves. No one wanted to be associated with someone who drugged their own husband. Her friends? Gone. Even the ones who'd stuck by her at first eventually realized the truth and cut ties. Her family? That was the hardest blow. Her parents and siblings had always been close, but when I showed them the evidence, they couldn't ignore it. "I don't know who you are anymore," her sister Emily told her during a particularly tense phone call, which I only knew about because Emily called me afterward, in tears. "How could you do this, Sarah? To Jack? To yourself?" Meanwhile, I was doing my best to pick up the pieces of my own life. The house felt emptier without Sarah in it, but it also felt calmer. Like I could finally breathe without walking on eggshells. The kids were adjusting too, though it wasn't easy. Ethan had taken on the role of the man of the house, trying to act tough and protect his little sister, but I could see the cracks in his armor. Lily, on the other hand, wore her emotions on her sleeve. She missed her mom, and no amount of careful explanations could fully soothe her. "When can we see Mommy again?" she asked one night as I tucked her into bed. I hesitated, not sure how to answer. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said finally. "But no matter what happens, I'm here for you. Always." She nodded, her big eyes brimming with tears. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too," I said, kissing her forehead. As for Sarah, she didn't take the loss quietly. She tried to fight back in any way she could, spreading rumors about me, accusing me of things I hadn't done, even trying to contact the kids behind my back. But none of it worked. Diane filed for a restraining order to prevent her from pulling any more stunts, and the judge granted it without hesitation. Sarah was furious, of course, but there was nothing she could do. She was losing control, and it was killing her. One day, about a month after the restraining order was put in place, I got a call from Emily. "She's not doing well," she said, her voice heavy with worry. What do you mean? I asked. She's spiraling, Emily admitted. She's been drinking a lot, and she's not taking care of herself. I think she's hitting rock bottom. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for Sarah. Despite everything she'd done, she was still a human being, a flawed, broken human being. But then I remembered the lies, the manipulation, the drugs she'd slipped into my food night after night, and the sympathy vanished. She made her choices, I said, my voice cold. Now she has to live with them. Emily sighed. I just thought you should know. That night, as I sat on the back porch with a beer in hand, I couldn't help but reflect on how far things had fallen apart. A year ago, I never would have imagined my life would end up here, single, raising 2 kids on my own, with the woman I once loved reduced to a shadow of her former self. But as painful as it was, I also felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't living under a cloud of doubt and suspicion. I wasn't being manipulated or lied to. I was free. The divorce was finalized a few weeks later. Diane called me with the news, her voice calm and professional. It's done, she said. You're officially divorced. Thanks, Diane, I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Take care of yourself, Jack, she said before hanging up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the paperwork. The name, Sarah, jumped out at me, a stark reminder of everything we'd been through. But instead of feeling anger or sadness, I felt nothing. She was part of my past now, a painful, complicated chapter in my life that was finally closed. That weekend, I took the kids to the park. We played catch, ate ice cream, and laughed like we hadn't laughed in months. For the first time in a long time, I felt like things were going to be okay. Ethan grinned as he tossed the ball back to me. You're pretty bad at this, Dad, he teased. I laughed, catching the ball. Hey, give your old man a break. I'm rusty. Lily ran up to me, her face sticky with melted ice cream. Can we get another one? She asked, holding up her empty cone. Just one more, I said, ruffling her hair. You're going to turn into an ice cream cone at this rate. As the sun set and the kids played on the swings, I sat on a bench and watched them, a small smile on my face. Life wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was starting to feel normal again. And for now, that was enough. There's a strange calm that settles in after a storm. Not the happy kind, where everything's sunshine and rainbows, but the quiet, exhausted kind. The kind where you sit in the wreckage of what used to be your life and think, well, I survived. That's where I was a few months after the divorce was finalized. I was surviving, rebuilding, and trying to make peace with the chaos Sarah had left in her wake. The kids were adjusting better than I expected. Ethan had thrown himself into his schoolwork and soccer, while Lily was finding comfort in drawing and spending time with her friends. There were still tough days, questions I couldn't fully answer, moments when they missed their mom, but we were getting through it together. As for me, I was slowly learning how to live for myself again. I didn't hear much from Sarah after the divorce. She'd moved out of town, probably to escape the embarrassment of everything that had happened. Emily called me occasionally to give me updates, not that I asked for them. She's trying to get her life together, Emily told me during one of those calls. She's been going to therapy, staying sober, she even mentioned getting a job. Good for her, I said flatly, not bothering to hide my lack of interest. Emily sighed. Jack, I know you don't care, but I thought you should know. She's really sorry for what she did. I paused, then said, she should be. One evening, I got a text from an unknown number. Sarah, hi Jack. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. You didn't deserve what I did to you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I stared at the message for a long time, my emotions warring inside me. Part of me wanted to reply, to demand answers, to make her explain why she'd done what she did. But another part of me, the part that was finally starting to move on, knew there was no point. So, I didn't respond. Life went on. I threw myself into work, picking up new projects and even earning a promotion. It felt good to have something to focus on, something I could control. The kids and I found a new routine. Weeknight dinners at the table, weekend trips to the park or the movies. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned for us, but it was ours, and it was enough. One night, as Ethan and Lily were watching a movie in the living room, I sat on the back porch with a beer, staring up at the stars. For the first time in months, I let myself reflect on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the fights, the way Sarah had tried to twist the narrative and make me the bad guy. It still hurt, but the anger wasn't as sharp as it used to be. It was like a dull ache now, a reminder of what I'd been through, but not something that controlled me anymore. I thought about Sarah, about the life we'd built and then destroyed, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. forgiveness. Not for her sake, but for mine. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. I didn't forgive her for what she'd done. Some things can't be excused, but I forgave her for taking up so much space in my head. She didn't get to have that power over me anymore. The kids and I kept moving forward. There were still tough days. Lily would ask when she could see her mom again, and Ethan would get quiet whenever Sarah's name came up. But we were healing, little by little. One day, while we were driving home from soccer practice, Ethan turned to me and said, "You're doing a good job, Dad." I glanced at him, surprised. "Thanks, buddy. That means a lot." He nodded, a small smile on his face. "I mean it. Things are better now, even if they're different." My chest tightened, and I reached over to ruffle his hair. "I love you, kiddo." "Love you too, Dad." Lily, ever the artist, drew a picture of the three of us one evening and taped it to the fridge. "This is our family now," she said proudly. I smiled, my heart swelling. It's perfect. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And as I stood there, looking at Lily's drawing, I realized something important. Sometimes, the hardest things we go through lead us to the strongest versions of ourselves. I'd lost a lot because of Sarah, but I'd gained something too. A new perspective, a deeper appreciation for the people who mattered most, and the strength to keep going no matter what. And for that, I was grateful.